Because I think a lot of times people think you have to have years of psychotherapy to make a change, and you don't. You can change your brain chemistry in an instant with your imagination, with your thoughts, with gentle behaviors.
You're listening to the Happy Doc Student Podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing clarity to the often mysterious doctoral process. Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Let me and my guests show you how to put more joy in your journey and graduate with your sanity, health, and relationships intact. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Frederick, and this is episode 84. And on this episode, I welcome Dr. Gina Simmons Schneider. Gina is a licensed psychotherapist, executive coach, and corporate trainer. As a coping skills expert, she has more than 25 years of experience helping people regulate difficult emotions and conflicts. Now, in addition to blogging for Psychology Today and writing the award-winning blog Manage Anger Daily, she is the author of Frazzlebrain, Break Free from Anxiety, Anger, and Stress Using Advanced Discoveries in Neuropsychology. Gina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Heather. I'm so thrilled to talk with you today. This is fun.
Why don't we spend just a few minutes with you telling the listeners a bit about your story, your background, and how it is that you became a coping skills expert?
Well, I have a very interesting, unconventional background, which I hope your listeners can relate to, because a lot of us don't come up in conventional ways. I grew up in poverty, single mom, young parents. Dad left, went to support the family at 15, had to lie about my age, helped to support myself and my younger sister, my mother and I, and dropped out of high school. I went to correspondence school and I worked, and that was before the internet, before you could do online learning. So they would send me a book and I'd read the book and take tests, and that's how I earned my high school diploma. And then I worked my way through college, many different jobs, and got really, at first was really interested in being an entertainer. So I was sort of a singer-songwriter by night, playing in clubs, and then by day, trying to wake up at 8 o'clock for a class. So yes, school was interesting and fun and stressful. But I eventually found that I hated, working in nightclubs, and I got into psychology, started working with emotionally disturbed youth and then incarcerated youth, doing counseling and job readiness training. And from that, ended up getting my marriage and family counseling license and my, eventually my doctorate. And I think I told you before the program, I picked the university based on advice from one of my professors, because I also was married, having children, and working, and also pursuing my PhD. And so when I was looking for programs, I had a choice between CSPP, and my professor was saying, I know a lot of married people that their marriage doesn't survive the program. It's very prestigious, but it is also a grind and really bad for people's mental and emotional health, which is ironic because it was psychology. So he advised this part-time program through the university I went to, United States International University. And it was actually a wonderful program. And I got a really nice part-time education. It took me longer, but I did get my PhD and then worked in private practice and then started into corporate training. One of the ways I got into anger management was we started doing critical incident stress debriefings after workplace homicides. So I was part of a team, and we would go in and really try to clean up the emotional wreckage that occurs after something traumatic like that. And I got tired of doing that. It was very stressful and would prefer, to prevent those things from happening. So we realized that there was a very important need for teaching people coping skills, teaching people how to calm down, teaching people how to manage conflict in the workplace. Then I realized, okay, you can teach people communication skills, you can teach people conflict management, what they really need to know is how to manage their own emotions. And so that's really my focus now with my book, Frazzlebrain. I think everybody can relate to that idea of feeling frazzled. That is the go-to word, I think, for our time is frazzled. My book has all of these calming techniques in it to teach people how to cope with really extreme emotions.
You've said so much there. Now, before we dive deeper into anger and how to calm that frazzled brain, I just want to spend a moment to say, I love that you shared that you took time to investigate your program, because I think a lot of people don't do that. And anyone out there thinking, oh, I might want to pursue some higher education, whether that's a master's or doctoral degree, do your homework, because you exited your program whole and with your marriage intact, and here you are doing amazing things. So I just love that you shared that. We talked a little bit here before the show about, of course, there's all these emotions that can impact how we're relating with the world, how we're showing up, like anxiety and stress. But anger is this one that it seems to me we don't spend a lot of time talking about, especially in the academic realm. If you're angry, it's often something, especially I think as a woman, I'll come at this from a female standpoint, that maybe you mask. And yet it's such an important emotion. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts about anger and then what to do about it.
Well, I've learned to make friends with anger. I think that part of one of the biggest coping mechanisms that I've been practicing that I think is the most helpful is to accept the emotion instead of fighting it. Because our emotions are there to protect us. And anger is a trigger saying, I'm being threatened. Something feels wrong. Something feels like it's harmful to me in some way. So what we want to be able to do, though, is pause and reflect on that anger and not immediately act on it. Because the thing we know about anger as an emotion is it narrows our perspective. And they've even studied this in the laboratory where they've made people mad and then watched where their eyes went on a screen. And our eyes look at a very narrow range. We literally see less when we're angry. But when we feel a mild positive emotion, like mild contentment, like you'll see people who are really relaxed and they're just kind of looking all around and, their gaze is there. You're actually getting in more information if you can calm yourself down a little bit. And of course, we make better decisions with more information, right? We make better, more well-informed decisions with more information about the world. So I've learned to make peace with my anger and actually really appreciate it and make friends with it. And I think as women, we're socialized to see that as bad, to see anger as, being a bad person. If you're mad, you're a bad person, right? And if we see other people who are mad, we see them as bad people. One of the things I do in marriage counseling with people is explain that if you're mad, that means you really care about something, And if you put that frame around it, oh, this person is really passionate. They care very much about whatever it is they're angry about, whether it's their child being bullied at school or the department, cutting back their hours or whatever. So if you see it as a sign of caring about something, maybe the person's expressing that caring in a way that's offensive, but it does help you relate in a slightly different way. One of the first things we teach in our conflict management and anger management classes is self-management. So that is really managing your nervous system arousal first before you try and change anything or before you try to communicate with the person who is upsetting you. And that is so that you will be more effective in that relationship, but also so that you will see more and notice more.
Gina, I would love to pause there and unpack that a little bit, because this perspective is something I have never thought about. To pause when you're feeling anger or seeing someone express anger. And if your first thought is, wow, this is interesting, I must really care about this, or wow, they must really care about that, it completely shifts the energy of the situation. As you were talking, some incidences were coming through my mind, and I'm like, wow, I'm totally viewing these in a different way now.
It's helpful. It is helpful. And it's also true. It's not like you're lying to yourself, right? People don't get upset about things that they don't really care about, right? So when somebody cares about something, that's also a window in conflict resolution, because then if you have, for example, I've coached some people in businesses, and this happens in academia all the time, where someone will come in, a professor might yell at the secretarial staff or something. And what happens is our tendency is to lower the temperature. So if somebody's coming in angry, we want to be calm and non-triggering, and so we lower our energy. And sometimes the angry person perceives that as, you don't care. There's no energy coming back to me. And you may be quaking, going, oh, don't yell at me, that's why you're calming down. It is sort of a reflex to sort of, let's bring the temperature of the room back down. I'm just going to be really calm. I'm going to talk really quietly. But I've coached some people who've had a boss who had a bullying style, or a staff member who in an academic institution who had a angry colleague they were working with. And I coached them on, see if you can keep the intensity up, not be angry, but just say, oh, I get you really upset about this, come back with some energy, and maybe even stand up if you're sitting down. And so both of you are eye to eye and you're standing up. Yeah, I can see. Okay, you're upset about this. This must be really important to you. And that it often will just immediately calm the other person down, because it's like, oh, somebody else cares too. Now, you don't have to agree. And often we don't, right? Often we don't agree with what the angry person is saying, because usually when we're angry, we're also exaggerating things. Often we're using hyperbole, But if we can match the person's energy sometimes, then it almost happens like magic. They calm down a little bit. It's like, okay, you get it. You get it. This is something that's an urgent matter, or you get it that this is something that I care about, and I'm not alone with that feeling.
That is so interesting, because like you said, it's maybe a little counterintuitive that if it's coming at you, you want to take a few deep breaths and de-escalate the situation. But this tip of match their energy in a way where you're not necessarily agreeing with them, but you're acknowledging, I get that you're upset. I'm here. Let's figure this out.
Exactly. And those would be perfect words to say too. I hear you. This is really upsetting. Let's figure this out together. You're not alone with this. I'm going to listen to you.
And I think this would be a great, I don't know if this is one of your Frazzle hacks or not, but for faculty dealing with students who are getting a review back or something being rejected and they're angry, because it happens. It happens for exactly the reason you said. They care a lot about this. There's a lot riding on this academic program, on this particular paper, if we're talking about the dissertation or doctoral project. I love that you shared that research, that when we're angry, we get narrow. Wow, that explains so much, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, our perception is extremely distorted. It's really amazing how distorted our perception gets when we're under the influence of anger. So a lot of times underlying anger are these emotions that are, especially with men, are very difficult to express. Shame is a big one. Feeling ashamed of oneself, feeling hurt. You won't hear most men say, you hurt my feelings, you know, but anger is a expression that men are allowed to express more often. It's considered a masculine, expression of passion. And it's unfortunately, it's acceptable in some situations, obviously to some degree. And that makes it difficult sometimes for men to even acknowledge in themselves that I feel ashamed of myself. I need to do well for my own self-esteem, or I need to do well because my parents will shame me, or, oh my God, I'm going to be, ostracized from my family, or I'm going to be heaping shame on my entire family. There's so many layers to those emotions. But what we're seeing on the surface, on the tip of the iceberg, is the anger. We're seeing the expression, the anger. So I think sometimes what a professor can do is show concern, like, I hear you. Listen, I see how passionate you are. And to also support the student's strengths, and speak to the student's strengths. I know you're capable. And that's why I want you to do better. And you have support here in the institution. And it's my job to help you really achieve your full potential. And so, framing it as something you're doing to help the student, something that you're doing to teach the student, to help elevate the student's standing, that might help if they're able to listen to it. I do think you have to kind of listen to your own instincts. I hesitate to give people a cookie cutter approach to every student, because some students are mentally ill and you don't know how they're going to interpret it. A lot of times there are cultural differences. I know certainly during 9/11, I was teaching at a local community college, and I was just, giving a standard psychology lecture, and one of the students accused me of racism. My whole lecture was really to try to lower the temperature in the classroom, and it had the opposite effect, because she was from war trauma, and she took the words out of context and spun them into something. And we had a conversation, and it was all very nice afterwards. But it taught me a lot that the words that I used, no matter how careful I was trying to be, when somebody's been through trauma, it means something different to them, right? So a lot of times if students are really overreacting and professor is taken aback and like, wow, this is a real extreme reaction, it usually always comes from trauma. It can come from child abuse. It can come from, being a refugee. It can come from all kinds of different places. So if we reframe, again, back to that idea of reframing it, instead of seeing it as this student is crazy or this student is extreme in their reactions, if we treated it more like maybe they've got a trauma in their background and that's causing them to overreact. And maybe if I behave with compassion, this must be really hard. What does this make you think of? Ask follow-up questions. That might actually help the student calm down, and you can get to some clear understanding.
And you bring up a really important point. I've heard other students talk about how sometimes when they're in their doctoral program, they feel like they're being seen just as a student who's there to perform this specific task, but they're a person who's got a family and a job. And now post-pandemic, there's few people, I think, that haven't been impacted in some way that maybe wouldn't fit directly under, a clinical definition of trauma, but most people have experienced over the last few years quite a number of events that have shaken them on some level. And so I think this is such an important point to kind of just consider the whole person, right? And where this reaction may be coming from. Now, if you're the student or even the faculty who's feeling anger, what are some of your go-to frazzle hacks for here you are, you feel your heart pounding, your blood boiling, maybe you have a vein that starts to bulge on your forehead like I do?
Yeah, I think we have to, first of all, go inward with compassion for ourselves and just say, you're hurting. Where's this coming from? Where is the fear? It's usually there's some anxiety or fear underneath. There can also be hurt. You might feel hurt. Sometimes it's the people we invest in the most, that we care about the most, that can infuriate us the most too. So I recommend making friends with your anger by basically just accepting, yeah, I'm angry, and this is here to signal me something. What's the signal? And then also doing something physically with the arousal, the nervous system arousal. Because with anger, our heart beats fast, like you said, literally your veins are popping out, right? So I find walking to be really helpful, pacing if you can't go outside. And sometimes you may need to just discharge with a short little fantasy about, 101 ways to tell off your boss or whatever, but don't linger on that too long, because the revenge fantasy or the getting back at people fantasy or the letting them have it verbally fantasy is mildly gratifying in the moment, but when we actually do it, it tends to inflame and make a situation more dysfunctional. We have a saying is in anger management that reactivity breeds dysfunction. So the more we react instead of choosing our response or acting on a conscious choice, the more we react, the more dysfunctional the encounter becomes. So if we can first go inward and listen to what is the anger telling me? The anger is telling me I'm really hurt. The anger is telling me I'm feeling rejected. So what happens then is our interpretation can either make us feel worse, or if we apply coping skills, we can start to feel better. So here are some interpretations that can make us feel worse. This is going to ruin my career, or this person never cared about me anyway, or this person's out to get me. So we're taking an incident where we feel betrayed or we feel hurt, and we're now globalizing it to the entire rest of our life or the entire relationship. And that amplifies our negative emotion and makes us feel worse. And the fact of the matter is we don't really know the other person's motives usually. We really don't know their backstory. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I've heard somebody's backstory and I went, oh, now I get it. One of the things we teach people in anger management is come up with 3 reasonable interpretations for why that person might have done that unreasonable thing. They didn't get any sleep the night before, they misunderstood. If you can come up with 3 reasonable reasons why the other person might have behaved in that way, or a sympathetic reason why they might have behaved that way, it doesn't really matter if it's right, because what it does for you is it gets you thinking flexibly. And we know mental flexibility is a key to emotional agility, emotional flexibility. And it's also a key to creative problem solving. So if we can back off of our original interpretation, that person's out to destroy my career. That's my original interpretation of their hostile comment in the faculty meeting, So if I back off of that and go, well, maybe they were scared. Maybe they got triggered that morning. Maybe their marriage is falling apart. Something that would make me sympathize. I still don't have to like it. Still have a problem to solve, but that gets me thinking much more flexibly. And mental flexibility is associated with creativity, all kinds of good things. It's associated with all kinds of good things. It also helps us back off of our emotions, and we don't have to stay stuck in the anger to protect ourselves. The anger is there to signal that we need to protect ourselves, but it isn't there to stay. We don't have to keep it in order to protect ourselves. We don't have to hold on to our anger to make ourselves safe.
Yeah, Gina, I love that activity, that exercise of what might be 3 things that could have happened that would be a reasonable explanation. It almost forces a pause.
Yes, it exactly does.
And as you were talking, I reflected back to the day that I found out that my children's father had passed away in an accident. I just remember that day of walking around in a fog, doing stupid things when I was driving, dropping things, not paying correctly at the grocery store, just being really a train wreck, and just being so grateful that people, weren't honking at me and screaming at me and yelling at me. And so whenever I'm in a situation where someone's doing something that just kind of could maybe rub me the wrong way, I think about that. I think, what if they just found out last night someone really important to them passed away and they can't hardly even navigate their world right now? And it just really makes my life much more enjoyable, frankly, because when you don't walk around mad at other people's little irritations,
Exactly.
it's easier to enjoy your day. So I love that exercise of saying, just stop and think of 3 things why this person may have acted this way.
I love your example. I mean, I'm so sorry you went through that, and I can't even imagine. It is this sort of like the book, the Joan Didion book, My Year of Magical Thinking, after her husband passed away, and just feeling like you're in this fog. And Frazzlebrain is really describing kind of that state too, where you're anxious, stressed, and there's irritability and anger often associated with it. Maybe in your case, it was not quite so much irritability or anger, but mostly just shock. But Frazzlebrain can be this combination of just multiple things coming at us at once. And we've certainly been, the world has certainly been through an enormous amount of stress and is still going through it with pandemics now, multiple pandemics. So we've got those things going on. And then we got our everyday stresses of getting our kids to school and trying to get our kids educated through COVID and all of the things that everybody's worried about. So that confluence of anxiety, anger, and stress coming at us all at once, it impairs our concentration. So it's Frazzlebrain, right? We feel foggy headed, but yet at the same time, a sense of urgency. Like, I got to get stuff done, or I'm behind, or, there's this pressure. So when we pause and we can think more flexibly, we can think about what is the backstory. And we used to do that as a family. We used to make up stories, like, well, what do you think that person's backstory is? Well, they're a secret agent, and, they're doing, and you can have a lot of fun with it. It can be absurd. It doesn't matter if it's probably accurate, because most of the time we don't know other people's backstory. But if we can do that, you're generating compassion. And we know from studies that if we can create a feeling of mild compassion for someone, we can still dislike their behavior strongly. But if we can generate a little compassion for them as a human being, our nervous system arousal and our stress levels in our body, our stress markers go down, and our inflammation goes down. We don't have the pulsing veins in the forehead and all that stuff. And that is better for us, for our well-being. But it also makes us cope better, because we're more likely, again, to see more and problem solve better.
Well, I think the world could use a lot more compassion towards others and towards self. I would love for you to talk just a little bit more about your book, Frazzlebrain. I love it because you back everything up with science, but you also intersperse these frazzle hacks. So you want to tell the listeners a little bit about your book, and then I'll make sure to have the link in the notes below.
Thank you so much. Yes. So I wrote this book because as a psychotherapist and as a coach, I recommend self-help books to people all the time on anxiety, anger, and stress. And the problem is that some of those books don't get into remedies until chapter 4 to 7. And a lot of my clients would start the book and go, it just makes me stressed out just to read this book. And so I realized there was a need for a book that actually created a feeling of calm while you were reading it. And that's the feedback I've been getting that pleases me the most on the book, is people are saying, I just feel better reading it. And I don't back away from the tough issues. I do talk about trauma. I do talk about tough things. However, I give these little frazzle hacks, which are really just exercises you can do in seconds that shift how you feel. Because I think a lot of times people think you have to have years of psychotherapy to make a change, and you don't. You can change your brain chemistry in an instant with your imagination, with your thoughts, with gentle behaviors. And I have these little Frazzlebrains. This is little Frazzlebrain I have. And on my Instagram, if you follow me on Instagram, I have the adventures of Frazzlebrain, and Frazzlebrain teaches little brain health skills and things like that. But what's cool about this is it's stress ball. And if you squeeze it, your left hand for about 15 seconds before a test or before an important performance or public speaking or something like that, 15 seconds, left hand, it activates the right brain, which is where we feel more positive emotions, and it lowers our anxiety and statistically improves our performance. After 15 seconds, you can use a tennis ball, you can use, So a lot of the skills in Frazzlebrain are really about shifting your own imagination, shifting your own thoughts, having mental flexibility in the moment, and becoming more skilled at lowering your nervous system arousal so that you can reliably calm yourself down no matter what's happening outside. And when you can do that, most people can figure things out really well once they've lowered their nervous system arousal. So it's broken up into 3 sections. We have focused thoughts, which are really just, what is a productive way for me to focus my thinking now that I'm mad? I can do the 101 ways to tell off my boss. How more cleverly and viciously can I do it? And that's okay. Do that for just a little while, not very long. But then if you can refocus your thoughts on, what do I want to accomplish here? What is my goal? What do I need? How can I help myself? Once we're focused on those kind of thoughts, now we're getting somewhere. And then we have intentional behaviors, which are specific things you're choosing to do, like you could squeeze a stress ball for 15 seconds on your left hand, or a tennis ball, or pillow, something soft. And you can do things like that. Intentional behaviors are also like intentional kindness. As we know, kindness is really good for our nervous system. It's really good for our relationships. And when we're thinking about ways to be kind, we feel better. And of course, then it has this sort of ripple effect. When we're kind to someone else, they tend to be more kind to other people. So acts of kindness are intentional behaviors that can change the world. And then we have healing experiences. And the healing experiences are really important because certain brain structures like the amygdala and the hippocampus, the amygdala kind of relays fear responses through to different parts of the brain. And the hippocampus is our emotional memory, where we store our emotional memories. And those are the parts of the brain that are really impacted by trauma and traumatic events. And so you can't really think your way out of trauma and what it does to the brain, because our brain is designed to never forget those things so we can protect ourselves. But what we do know is that new experiences overlay and actually heal that. So if we can seek out healing experiences like a comforting community, like time in a forest or by waterways like creeks, rivers, streams, lakes, the sea. So there are several experiences that we can cultivate in our life consciously that heal the damage that can be done with chronic stress or trauma in our lives. So all 3 of those pieces together really are the building blocks of recovering from any of the tough things life throws at us.
And bonus for all the listeners out there that are totally into research, everything you talk about, you back up with science. So for those extra curious minds who want to know, well, hang on, how is this working? You've got that for them too.
Exactly. I like people to understand why these things work, because there is something about telling ourselves this works because It's changing my brain chemistry. It's changing how my hormones are responding to certain things. There's neuroscience to back it up. We can see what's going on in your brain, and here's how. I think that what that does is it inspires hope, and hope is healthy, right? Because if we're just trying something and not really understanding why it might work, it's not necessarily going to be as effective as if we actually know, oh, I have hope that this really is going to help me.
Do you have a favorite quote that you go to or that you share with people as they're struggling with their emotions, or maybe some final words of wisdom you want to share with the audience?
There's a couple of quotes from comedians that I love. I love Lily Tomlin's quote, "For fast-acting relief, slow down." I practice that a lot because when we're under the influence of Frazzlebrain, we feel a sense of urgency and we feel like we have to get on it. And so the opposite of what we want to do, slow down, is often the best response, to just slow down. Sometimes just stop. And sometimes I'll tell myself, just stop, breathe, listen, And then the other quote I like from George Carlin, who's the late George Carlin, a comedian I've loved. He said, "Life is a near-death experience." And the reason why I like that quote is it reminds us that life is fragile and it's precious. And we don't want to waste time with our negative emotions that are unnecessary. Obviously, we need our negative emotions to signal us. We don't need to linger there. We need to get the lesson from what the emotion is telling us and then move on from it. So when I think life is a near-death experience, I go, okay, seize the day. It's important to not take this moment for granted, to not take the relationships in my life for granted, and not to take my own life for granted.
I love those quotes. Both of those would be excellent screensavers for
I think so, yeah.
Not just doctoral students, anyone. Thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom. And again, I'll make sure I have all the links for how people can connect to you, but also how to get your book. It was such a pleasure speaking with you today.
It was a pleasure talking to you and meeting you, Heather. And thank you for all the great work you're doing.
Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Until then, if you're looking for more ways to invite joy into your journey, check out the free resources at expandyourhappy.com. You'll find downloads like an article I wrote titled, "The Doctoral Journey, 12 Things You Need to Know That They Probably Won't Tell You," and a worksheet that will help you pick a general research area for your dissertation or doctoral project. Based on audience request, there is a PDF that organizes all podcasts by the 7 steps detailed in the Happy Doc Student Handbook, which you can also find on the website. And if you're looking for Happy Doc Student swag, I've got that too. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel, and if you want to make my day, rate and review so that together we can change the way graduate education is delivered and experienced. Hey, one more thing. Just a quick reminder that the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only.